It happened during a family dinner, right after the waiter set down the wine glasses. My mother didn't hesitate. She looked directly at me, laughed, and asked, loud enough for the entire table to hear, why I still hadn't bought a penthouse like my brother. The laughter came quickly. Too quickly. Forks paused. Someone coughed. My brother leaned back in his chair, smiling like this was confirmation of something he'd already won. I stayed quiet, my expression calm, even as something burned deep in my chest. This wasn't humor. It was positioning. A reminder of exactly where they believed I belonged. I waited until the laughter faded on its own. Then I spoke, just one sentence, soft and steady. At the time, no one understood what it meant. But that moment would eventually force every person at that table to reconsider everything they thought they knew about success, ambition, and who had actually built it. My name is Harper. I was around 30 then, old enough to know myself, young enough that people still felt comfortable overlooking me. I worked in financial investing, mostly real estate. Nothing flashy. No buzzwords or dramatic announcements at family gatherings. Just long-term strategies, quiet decisions, and patience that didn't look impressive in conversation. I grew up in a household where roles were never discussed, yet always understood. My brother Logan was the dreamer, the future, the one everyone expected big things from. I was the reliable one. The steady one. Logan was praised for taking risks. I was praised for being sensible. When he spoke, people listened. When I spoke, conversations drifted past me. Family dinners followed a familiar rhythm. My mother, Monica, sat at the center, half host, half judge, guiding the conversation wherever she wanted it to go. My father, Frank, stayed neutral enough to seem fair without ever disrupting the balance. And Logan? Logan learned early how to perform success. Confidence came easily to him, even when substance didn't. People believed him because they wanted to. I learned not to fight for attention. If I disagreed, I was too sensitive. If I stayed quiet, I was so mature. Either way, the spotlight never moved. So I built my life elsewhere. A modest apartment. The same car for years. Neutral clothes. Early mornings. Long spreadsheets. A life that didn't photograph well but held together beautifully. Logan's life looked different. Better views. Louder stories. Expensive dinners he never seemed concerned about paying for. My mother repeated his achievements proudly, sometimes adding details that weren't even true. She'd glance at me while doing it, like the comparison itself was the point. By the time Logan's penthouse became part of the conversation, it wasn't just a place, it was proof. Proof, they thought, of who had succeeded. What none of them realized was that while they were admiring the view, they had completely missed who poured the foundation beneath it. Before we continue the story, please tell me in the comments what your name is and where you are listening from, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for such fantastic content. Because the truth about that penthouse, and my role in it, was something none of them were ready to hear, yet. Once Logan moved into the penthouse, the shift was immediate. Not in his life, in ours. That apartment became the silent centerpiece of every family conversation, even when no one mentioned it directly. My mother found subtle ways to bring it up, like it was a shared family achievement. She talked about the building, the neighborhood, the view, the doorman, details she'd never actually seen in person, but repeated proudly anyway. Logan didn't say outright that he owned the place. He didn't need to. He let people fill in the gaps. He'd say things like, "Where I live, parking is impossible," or, "In my building, you have to schedule deliveries ahead of time." Each sentence carried weight because everyone wanted it to. My mother beamed every time. My father nodded along, neutral as always, somehow landing on Logan's side without saying much at all. I stayed quiet. I always did. Then Tara entered the picture. She had a voice that carried and opinions that never paused. She talked about success like it was a look, an address, a lifestyle, a man who fit the image. She praised Logan loudly and corrected him privately, pushing him to upgrade everything. Bigger presents. Bigger future. Bigger proof. When she talked about the penthouse, she said things like, "This place finally matches you," as if an apartment could validate a person. Family gatherings became exhausting. Logan joked about upgrades, renovations, maybe buying the place someday. My mother nodded eagerly, already imagining it as permanent. Then she'd turn to me, smiling softly. "You see, Harper? This is how people build real lives. You play it too safe." She always said it kindly. That somehow made it worse. One afternoon, Logan mentioned buying the penthouse. Not seriously, casually. Like it was already decided. He said the owner didn't seem very involved. Just some investor. Probably ready to cash out. Something tightened in my chest. I watched my mother's face light up. She asked questions. She imagined the future out loud. She praised Logan for thinking long-term. No one looked at me. Not once. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my phone longer than necessary. There was another message from the property manager. Another update. Another delay. Late payments. Rolling balances. The same pattern I'd been tracking quietly for months. I wasn't angry. I was tired. I thought about warning them. Dropping a hint. Saying something indirect. But I already knew how that would go. I'd be accused of jealousy. Of overreacting. Of trying to pull attention away from my brother. I'd be told to let it go. To remember that family matters more than details. Details were my job. So I did what I'd always done. I stayed silent and kept records. The moment everything crystallized came at another dinner. My mother said it plainly, smiling as if she were offering guidance. "Harper, you should learn from your brother. Women don't need to push so hard. Stability is enough. Logan is showing you what real ambition looks like." I folded my napkin. I smiled. I didn't respond. Because in that moment, I finally understood something clearly. They weren't misunderstanding me. They were choosing not to see me. And that meant the only way this would ever end was with the truth placed directly in front of them, where no one could laugh it away. That was the night I stopped hoping for fairness and started preparing for clarity. And once that switch flipped, there was no going back. After that dinner, something inside me went quiet. Not numb, focused. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. Stopped wondering what I could have said differently. Stopped hoping someone would eventually notice. That kind of hope drains you slowly, and I was done bleeding energy into rooms that never gave anything back. I went back to my routine. Early mornings. Coffee that tasted burnt by the third sip. Screens filled with numbers that didn't care about family dynamics or hurt feelings. The property manager's emails arrived like clockwork. Neutral tone. Clean summaries. Late payments. Accumulating balances. No drama, just facts lining up into a pattern that could no longer pretend to be temporary. I didn't confront Logan. I didn't drop hints or ask questions disguised as concern. I knew how that story would end. My words would be twisted. My intentions questioned. I'd be told I was creating problems where none existed. That I should let things go. Be the bigger person. I was done being bigger by shrinking. Logan kept performing. He posted city lights and rooftop sunsets. He talked about long days and bigger plans. Tara amplified everything, turning his image into something polished and aspirational. Each photo confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't stability. It was scaffolding, designed to look solid as long as no one leaned on it too hard. My mother started calling more often. Her questions sounded casual, but they carried weight. Was I happy? Did I feel fulfilled? Did I ever worry about ending up alone? Each one came with the same quiet assumption: that a quieter life must be a smaller one. I answered politely. I gave nothing extra. Behind the scenes, I made a decision and committed to it fully. I wouldn't expose the truth in anger. I wouldn't use it to embarrass anyone. If it came out, it would come out clean, in the open, at a moment they chose, not me. That decision brought an unexpected sense of calm. Then my birthday dinner was announced. I considered declining. I already knew how it would go. The restaurant would be chosen carefully. Logan would arrive late. The penthouse would come up. Comparisons would be wrapped in compliments. I could already feel the familiar tension in my chest just thinking about it. But then something shifted. This wasn't about protecting my peace anymore. It was about ending a pattern that had followed me my entire life. Silence had kept things comfortable, for everyone but me. So I said yes. I showed up on time. Dressed simply. Sat down without bracing myself. I watched how the table naturally leaned toward Logan, how attention arranged itself without anyone noticing. And for the first time I didn't feel small. Because I wasn't walking into that room as the responsible daughter or the overlooked sister. I was walking in carrying the truth. And it was heavy enough to change the air the moment it touched the table. The restaurant was exactly my mother's style. Soft lighting, crisp white tablecloths, glassware polished so clean it reflected every movement. The kind of place where people lowered their voices instinctively, like being there said something important about who you were. I arrived a few minutes early. My parents were already seated. My mother smiled brightly when she saw me, the kind of smile meant more for the room than the moment. My father stood, hugged me quickly, and pulled out my chair. Everything felt practiced. Familiar. Logan was late. Of course he was. When he finally walked in, the energy shifted immediately. He carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew the room would wait for him. Tara followed close behind, scanning the space like she was already choosing angles for photos. Logan apologized without sounding sorry and slid into his seat like he owned it. Before menus were even closed, the penthouse came up. Traffic near his place was terrible. The elevator was slow tonight. The view was incredible. Each comment landed exactly where he wanted it to. My mother leaned in, eyes bright, soaking it all up. She asked questions. She laughed too loudly. My father nodded along, offering neutral comments that somehow always reinforced Logan's story. Then my mother turned to me. "So, Harper," she said, setting her glass down carefully. "Any big changes lately?" I shook my head lightly. "Nothing major." She smiled, but it wasn't warm. Her voice carried just enough to reach nearby tables. "You know, at your age, most people are trying to move up. Logan already lives in a penthouse. You're still in that same apartment, right?" The table went quiet for half a second. Then someone laughed. Tara smiled into her drink. Logan leaned back, arms crossed, enjoying the moment like it was something he'd earned. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. "I'm comfortable," I said calmly. My mother waved it off. "Comfortable is fine for a woman," she replied. "But ambition looks different. Sometimes you have to push harder. Look at your brother, he knows how to live." There it was. The line that always cut the deepest. Dressed up as advice. Built entirely out of comparison. Logan smiled wider. Tara nodded like this all made perfect sense. The moment stretched, waiting for me to shrink the way I always had. I didn't. I took a sip of water. I let the silence settle. I felt the weight of every report, every late notice, every quiet decision I'd made over the years. Then I spoke. "The penthouse," I said calmly. "You own it?" Logan blinked, surprised I'd entered the conversation. "Yeah," he said. "I do." The words didn't land right away. My mother blinked. Tara's smile froze. Logan laughed once, sharp and quick. "Okay. Good one. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. No shaking. No rush. I opened the property management summary I knew by heart and turned the screen toward him. You've been renting it from me, I said evenly. Through the management company. And you're a few months behind, by the way. The silence that followed felt physical. And that was when everything finally stopped pretending. For a moment, no one spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was heavier than that, like the air itself had thickened. My mother leaned forward slowly, her mouth slightly open, eyes locked on my phone as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if she stared long enough. My father looked from the screen to Logan, then back again, trying to make sense of something he'd never questioned before. That's not funny, Logan said quietly. It's not a joke, I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. You never asked who owned it. You never needed to. You were enjoying the image. My mother recovered first. She straightened in her chair, her shock turning quickly into anger. Why would you hide something like this? She demanded. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something settle in my chest. You never asked, I said. And every time I tried to speak, you talked over me. My father finally cleared his throat. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding, he said carefully. Logan probably thought he'd catch up on the payments. Logan seized on that immediately. Exactly, he said. I was handling it. You didn't have to do this here. I met his eyes. Then tell the truth, I said. Or stop letting everyone believe you earned something you didn't. Tara pushed her chair back slightly, her voice tight. This feels unnecessary. Family things should be handled privately. They should, I agreed. But this stopped being private the moment I was humiliated in public. No one laughed now. No one nodded along. My mother twisted her napkin in her hands. My father leaned back, silent. Logan stared down at the table, his confidence draining away in real time. I'm not here to embarrass you, I continued. I'm here to set a boundary. I slid my phone back into my bag. You have 1 month to catch up on what you owe or move out. No extensions. And I expect you to stop implying you own something you don't. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Tara avoided everyone's eyes. Logan finally looked up at me, and for the first time there was no performance left. You made me look stupid, he said quietly. I shook my head. No. I let you finish the story you started. The server arrived with the check and hesitated, sensing something was wrong. She placed it gently at the edge of the table. No one reached for it. The celebration was over. The illusion was gone. And nothing in our family would ever sit the same way again. We left the restaurant without dessert, without photos, without pretending everything was fine. Outside, the night air felt cooler than it had before, sharper, quieter. My mother walked ahead of us, her heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks she didn't know how to finish. My father followed a few steps behind, shoulders slightly hunched, saying nothing. Logan lagged back, staring at his phone as if it might suddenly offer an explanation. For the first time, no one asked me to soften it. No one told me to let it go. The truth had already done what it needed to do. The next morning, my phone lit up with missed calls. My mother first. Then again an hour later. I let them go to voicemail. When I finally listened, her voice sounded different, controlled, carefully wounded. She talked about family. About respect. About how things didn't need to be handled that way. She never apologized. She didn't need to. The space between her words said everything. Logan tried another route. His messages started measured, almost reasonable. He said he'd figure it out. That things had gotten away from him. That he'd been under pressure. Then the tone shifted. Questions turned into blame. Why had I waited so long? Why couldn't I have helped him quietly? I replied once. Just once. I told him the deadline hadn't changed. After that, I stopped engaging. Weeks later, the property manager confirmed he was moving out. The unit was left in decent condition. No damage. No drama. Just boxes, bare walls, and the quiet aftermath of a life that had been staged for other people's approval. I chose not to chase the overdue payments. Not out of kindness, out of clarity. The chapter needed to end cleanly. Family gatherings felt different after that. The comparison stopped. My mother chose her words more carefully. My father started asking real questions about my work instead of redirecting the conversation. Logan showed up quieter, dressed simpler, less certain, but more real. We spoke occasionally. Not like before. Better. Later that year, I sold the penthouse and rolled the money into something long-term, something solid. I upgraded my own life slowly and intentionally, without announcing it or using it as proof. What surprised me most wasn't the financial shift. It was the relief. The weight of carrying the truth alone had finally lifted. I hadn't won anything that night. I hadn't defeated anyone. I'd simply stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable. And once the truth was out in the open, everything finally settled where it belonged. The months that followed taught me something I hadn't expected. The fallout wasn't loud. There were no dramatic confrontations, no big apologies, no moment where everyone suddenly understood me. Instead, everything became quieter and more honest. My mother stopped using Logan as a measuring stick. She didn't praise him the way she used to, but she didn't criticize him either. It was like she'd finally realized how fragile the image had been and was afraid to touch it again. When she spoke to me, her tone changed. She asked instead of assumed. She listened longer than she talked. It wasn't warmth, not exactly, but it was respect. And for her, that was significant. My father changed in subtler ways. He began asking about my work, not as polite filler, but with real curiosity. He wanted to know how deals were structured, why patience mattered, how long-term strategies actually worked. Sometimes he nodded slowly, like pieces were finally clicking into place. Other times, he just listened. That alone felt new. Logan struggled the most. Without the penthouse, without the image, he didn't know how to introduce himself anymore. He showed up to family gatherings dressed down, quieter, less certain. At first, the silence made him uncomfortable. Then, gradually, it became easier. When we talked, there was no competition in his voice. No performance. Just honesty, sometimes awkward, sometimes defensive, but real. One night, months later, he admitted something quietly while we were clearing plates. I didn't think it would go that far, he said. I thought I'd catch up eventually. I nodded. I know. That was all that needed to be said. What struck me most was how differently people treated me once the illusion was gone. Not because I demanded it. Not because I explained myself. But because reality had finally spoken for me. There was nothing left to argue with. I realized then that being underestimated isn't always a disadvantage. Sometimes it's protection. It gives you space to build without interruption, without expectations, without noise. While everyone else is busy proving themselves, you're laying foundations they don't even notice. I didn't become louder after that. I didn't start correcting people or listing achievements. I didn't need to. My life didn't change in ways that looked impressive from the outside, but it felt solid in a way it never had before. Success, I learned, doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation from people who only recognize it when it's flashy. And it definitely doesn't need permission. But the most important lesson came later, when I realized something even deeper. That night at the restaurant wasn't the end of the story. It was only the moment everyone else finally caught up to the truth I'd been living with all along. And what happened next was the part no one ever expects. What stayed with me after everything settled wasn't the confrontation, or even the silence that followed. It was the clarity. The kind that only arrives once you stop trying to manage how other people see you. Once the truth was out, I no longer felt the need to explain my choices or soften my success so it wouldn't intimidate anyone else. Life didn't suddenly become dramatic or glamorous. It became honest. I kept working the same way I always had, quietly, consistently, focused on the long game. I made decisions that wouldn't impress anyone at a dinner table but would still matter 10 years later. I invested carefully. I waited when waiting was smart. I moved when moving made sense. And for the first time, I did all of it without carrying the invisible weight of comparison. My relationship with my family never turned perfect. It turned real. My mother still struggled with her old instincts, but she caught herself now. My father became more present, more curious, less passive. And Logan finally started building something of his own. Smaller, slower, but real. We weren't close in the way people expect siblings to be, but we were honest. And that mattered more. I learned that people don't always underestimate you because you lack something. Sometimes they underestimate you because it's easier than questioning the story they've already told themselves. Challenging that story makes them uncomfortable. Letting it stand feels safer. For a long time, I thought staying quiet was weakness. I thought confidence had to be loud, visible, obvious. I was wrong. Real confidence doesn't announce itself. It waits. It compounds. It shows up when it's needed and nowhere else. That dinner didn't make me powerful. It revealed the power I'd already built by staying patient when no one was watching. By choosing substance over image. By understanding that success doesn't need witnesses to be real. The penthouse was never the point. It was just the symbol everyone could finally understand. What mattered was the shift that happened after, the way the room changed, the way conversations changed, the way I no longer felt the need to earn space that should have been mine all along. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. You don't owe anyone proof of your worth. You don't need to rush your timeline to match someone else's highlight reel. And you don't need to correct people who underestimate you, because reality eventually does that on its own. Sometimes the strongest move isn't speaking louder or pushing harder. Sometimes it's standing exactly where you are, letting the truth catch up. And refusing to shrink ever again.